I am a research director with the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres, and I hope that everybody in this room knows us. We are absolutely the awesomest. We represent 29 friendship centres communities across Ontario, so lots of people. We've been around for more than 40 years. And in 2011, we created a research unit, and in 2012, we published our research framework, which you have on your tables. You all know that basically Indigenous people have been researched to death. And in the sort of colonial and post-colonial times which we are living in, the research was always on Indigenous people, so researchers would come to Indigenous communities, measure people's heads, ask questions, very offensive questions, then disappear forever. There was an absolute lack of any kind of ethical standards. The research was basically irrelevant to people in the communities, and it wasn't responsive to people's needs and priorities. So in the 70s, which by the way coincides with the fact that at that time there was a big influx of Indigenous people into urban communities in Ontario, people started talking about participatory research action, which you're all familiar with, and the idea of research with Indigenous people, which is great. But there are still lots of questions around it, around control and who really does research and what are the rules. So what we do at the FIFC, working with 29 communities across Ontario, is actually research by Indigenous people. And the USAI framework that you have on your tables, it's really about people kind of regaining control and building capacity to do whatever they want to do. And this type of research this is a value-laden research. It's not a value-neutral research. It's research that actually speaks in people's voices about people's identity, and it's all about cultural confidence. And we call this research holistic, and it's not a typo. It is spelled with a W. It's about getting together all the pieces of the puzzle that for people, for Indigenous people, this is how you live. This is how you have your good life every single day, which this is how they identify culture very often. And this research is practical. And we call it community-driven research, and as opposed to community-based or community-placed research. And in this type of research, communities decide what they want to do, with whom, how, when, and what are they going to do with those. With the findings. And when we published our USAI framework in 2012, we immediately worked with communities to initiate a community-driven research in 3 communities, which is now done. And the results are amazing. Everything was done by communities. They hired Indigenous researchers from the communities. And one of the communities just got $500,000 from the provincial government because they actually concluded this research. We also part of it was the research on mental health, and I will leave this copy of this outside so you can look at it. What is really important to know is that since 2012 until now, we now have all the pieces in place. So we have all the tools. We have our research framework, we have research procedures, we have research ethics committee, and we have research ethics review, so people have to go through the review. And we also just published this Indigenous Researchers Manual, which I will also leave outside. So the USAI framework really creates, as I mentioned, a space for communities to initiate research, to invite who they want, and do it in a way that works for them. It is grounded in traditional Indigenous knowledge. There are several medicine wheels that influence the development of this model, and it has 4 principles: utility, self-voicing, access, and interrelationality. And they're really very basic ones. By utility, research has to be practical now, not in 10 months, not in 10 years, now. And the communities have to really benefit from it. Self-voicing, well, obvious, it's really in people's voices. Access, and this was mentioned before, people have to understand. They have to understand the idea of research. They have to understand methodologies. They have to have access to it. And interrelationality, this is something about recognizing the fact that indigenous people, we have to look at indigenous people's political, historical, and often geographical context and think about it, especially when we deal with urban indigenous communities. And this is something practical. So we have a lot of partners, we have a lot of collaborators, and there are things that people, communities, and the FIFC and the friendship centers expect from them. First of all, be culturally competent. So really don't assume that your culture is better, that you know, that your knowledge system is valid, that your science is valid. Learn very actively about people's cultures, knowledge systems, and let them decide what they do, how they want to do it, and when. Be respectful. So don't come to people in the last moment. Don't come to them with the written proposal. Come with an idea that together you can talk about. Be humble. Don't think that your knowledge, your experience, your privilege, everything around you actually allows you to kind of boss people around, rush them into things. And don't just help. Really try to be useful. And the best way to do it is really think about the fact that the relationships take time. Come to a friendship center, offer your help, wash dishes, I don't know, sit and talk to people, sit and talk to women. What I wanted to ask you basically is that when we talk about inclusive research, think about who actually does the inclusion. Because it's great, it sounds amazing, inclusive sounds great. But think about the fact who does the inclusion and who is included. So what I would like to people to consider is really thinking more about those relationships and sort of being on the same team. And when I say relationships, you really have to learn about people with whom you want to work. And it's not just coming to a feast and present to people and then leave. And sometimes people think, well, this is I engaged people, I included them. First of all, you probably know that the feast was a ceremony, and there were lots of things happening before the feast for people to actually prepare to welcome you and talk to you. And again, when I said, don't just help, be useful, this is what people expect. Otherwise, nobody will trust us, nobody will trust you. So just that you know that we managed to get many partners who now think like we do, and people who are willing to work with indigenous communities on their own terms. And you have a list of several amazing, incredible projects that we do. And yes, please call me, please visit our website. We are very open to creating those relationships.